We got Bob from Mississippi wanting to talk to us. Bob, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
And thank you so much for having me on the show. Also, I will echo big thanks to the crew and the call screeners, et cetera. That's all part of activism and creating a community. So thanks to those folks for doing all that they do.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Bob, what do you got for us?
Okay, so the prompt for next week is a bad way to tell someone they're wrong. I guess maybe the theme for my call here is, what's a good way to tell someone they're wrong? And kind of thrown into that is also Brandolini's Law, which you mentioned last week, and we'll eventually define that and talk about that perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. So Brandolini's Law is something I mentioned last week because we were talking about what were we talking about in context? We were just talking about, I think, basic bullshit. I don't think there was a specific thing, but it's the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than needed to produce it. Okay, that's Brandolini's Law. So we're reaching the disinformation age, right? Every other TikTok you come across, if you're in the political TikToks, they all have just a minute worth of crap that you can't respond to without making like an hour-long response video, and it just becomes too much to respond to, and that's kind of the age that we're living in. And so we're encountering people every day that are wrong about things. How do we deal with that? Going back to basics here. I have my own ideas about it, but Kayse, why don't you start this conversation off? What do you think?
Ooh, I love this question, Bob. I love that you flipped that question because it's a great one. And it's one that I've actually seen circulating a lot right now, is how can we change minds in a way that's actually productive and effective, that doesn't, and this is key, that doesn't perpetuate the harm of what it's like to evangelize or proselytize, right? And one of the takes that I have seen that I resonate with the most is this idea of, there's a few different ways to label it, but it's called heart-centered or empathy first, or maybe more easily said as starting with common ground, right? Starting with the similarities between yourself and this person who needs to be told that they're wrong in some form, right? I think that it's really easy to start with picking apart the logic of something that is illogical. It's really easy to start there because once you have done that cognitive process yourself, once you have done that work, it's so easy to be like, no, man, that's bullshit. What are you talking about? And starting there is going to immediately, because we're humans and we don't want to feel like we're wrong, we want to be accepted, we're social creatures, we're going to put up a wall, right? Immediately. Emotionally, in a sense, almost. And we're not going to be as open to what the logic, quote, says or what it's saying. And so this idea of starting with the commonality is something that I have found really powerful. And on my channel, we've reacted to some videos of people having conversations with someone who has a completely different perspective on these very real, very difficult subjects, and starting with the, hey, what do you care about? What is your value? What is important to you? And what we find when we start with those heart-centered or more empathetic questions first is similarities. Like, well, I want people to feel free. I want people to feel safe. I want people to X, Y, and Z. And starting from there, and then working to, okay, so what does that look like practically in your life? What does it mean for someone to be free? What does it mean for someone to feel safe or protected or have equal access to opportunity? What does that look like? And then when you start to run into the tension between the differences of how maybe they are consuming information that goes against what you think is more logical or what is correct or right, that's when you can start to make some real progress. But in my perspective, and what I've seen some of these other creators and some really good writers that I read their newsletters, starting with that commonality starts the solidarity of, hey, let's remember that we're both human, and if we can actually come to a consensus here and now, maybe we can actually make progress for everyone, not just you and not just me. So that's kind of where I've been looking into this a lot. I've been very interested in how to tell someone they're wrong, the good way to tell someone that they're wrong. So that's a great question.
Yeah. This is. Go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, I think the examination of the motivation is important, because the case that I'm referring to, or what triggered this, was a woman who posted a Bob Dylan quote that essentially was a tribute to the passing of Pope Francis. And I'm not going to go into the story of chasing it down, but I understand the motivation for why this Facebook friend of mine posted this, because Bob Dylan is a hero of hers, and so is the Pope Francis. And so it's like chocolate and peanut butter. She was motivated to post this on her wall because she thought that a hero of hers was saying nice things about another hero of hers. And I'm sure that she would love that to be the reality. Perhaps she would prefer to live in a world where Bob Dylan is saying nice things about Pope Francis. Someone jumped in immediately when she posted this and said, "I don't believe you." That's one choice, and I kind of waited and I was observing. And then she actually provided a source. She did her due diligence. She said, "No, I found the quote. It was in this story." She posted the link to the story. And then I wound up entering the conversation and kind of chasing it down. I wrote to the person who wrote the story. I said, "Hey, where did you get that Bob Dylan quote?" And kind of chased it down that way. And at that point, then my friend removed the thing from her wall. And that's, in my mind, sort of a shame, because I was trying to model the process as far as how can we actually figure out what is actually the reality here. You claim that Bob Dylan said this. This other person jumped in and said that he didn't. I want to know what the truth is. And I think a lot of folks do, but I'm not convinced that everybody prioritizes reality. Some people, I think, would prefer to live in a world where Bob Dylan is saying nice things about the Pope. And then that becomes a really tough thing, because then if you can't agree on reality, then how can you have a conversation?
Not just reality, Bob. So I think people prioritize their social connections with other people than they do through some time too. And what I mean by that too is sometimes people just don't want to rock the boat with the people that they love and care about too. It's rude to tell somebody on their Facebook, "Hey, you're wrong for posting this. This is bad information." You're right. Right? You're absolutely right. And they shouldn't be posting misinformation or misattributes. But to a lot of people, that's considered rude. There's a social cost to that. And some people don't even want to explore just because of that, I think. It's really hard. What a tough thing, because I got into the point where I'm at in my life because of a lifelong education, and trying and prioritizing this. And to get to somebody to expect them to be where I'm at after a single conversation with them, that would be hubris on my part. I can't do that. Nobody can do that. So we have to start with the little things. I actually think what you're talking about here is a great example, because that's such a small thing to examine how people get to their claims. How do people understand knowledge? Not everybody understands claims through a scientific lens. Science is not always a means by which people say that they know things. They maybe say that they know things because they have personal experience on something, or maybe they've had deeply religious experiences that inform themselves, right? Something that's outside of these sorts of views. I think understanding how people consume and get their truth really matters. Maybe they get their truth from Fox News. They watch Fox News every day, and that's something that they value as a source of true information. I guess I'm sort of rambling here, but the point is, we all live in these media ecosystems that can support us in any kind of life that we want to live in, and it's getting harder and harder. But I think little things like that, where you can sort of examine a claim together and say, "Hey, that's interesting. Where did you get this information? How did you know that this was true? What source did you get this from?" Starting a conversation from there is actually a really good gateway into a larger conversation, because that's something with fairly minor stakes, right? Like Bob Dylan and the Pope quote, that's not going to end anyone's life. You know what I mean? That's not going to cause irreparable harm, right? But misinformation about COVID or other kinds of things maybe could, right? So there's something to that, Bob.
Yeah,
I really like the idea. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I will tease, if anybody's planning on going to NanaCon, I'll be doing a workshop there in July called Working with Interfaith Partners. And this is an ongoing question. I don't necessarily have a lot of answers here, but I would love to hear more people's opinions as far as how do you continue conversations about what is real, especially when you're when you're trying to talk to somebody who is approaching reality with a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, when I was in college and I had that conversation with Anthony Magnabosco that I was telling you about, I didn't know how I figured out whether things were true. I didn't read the news at the time. I wasn't like as informed about the world. I just kind of had my own channels of communication with the world and with people that I relied on. And I didn't have anybody ask me those questions to examine myself in that way. Nobody had really asked me those kinds of things before. It's not really typically encouraged in church environments. Funnily enough, I don't know why. You would wonder why. So it's like I think
it's actually it's a very human and compassionate thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ask somebody a question because again, I prioritize. I value knowing reality, and I want to share that same passion for knowing reality with other people. And in my mind, quite often it's the asking of questions that really can help someone find their way.
Yeah, I think maybe it comes from a place of motivation. Maybe because you mentioned we don't want to be evangelists, right? Maybe it's less about us trying to get the other person to come to our conclusion and more about giving people the tools and the freedom to examine their own claims themselves, because it's a very liberating thing. I personally see atheism as a liberating thing, really, honestly, for me as a former Christian, because now I'm in a place where I can question a lot of stuff without the hassle of people judging me or people giving me all kinds of crap. I mean, there's a lot of lefty folks that will judge people too. Don't get me wrong. That's definitely a thing too. But the point is the freedom of discussion is still there that I didn't have before. And I think, like, honestly, people just don't always have these tools to examine that. So maybe it's just about just asking those gentle questions at first so people can help maybe realize where their stuff's coming from. Because, a lifetime of misinformation, it's going to take a long time than just a single conversation. But every journey starts with a single step, right? So I don't know. I think that's all I can say on the topic. Kayse, you have any other thoughts?
I really like the idea of examining the motivations of people's actions. I think, we as atheists, it can be so, we love our objective reality. We love our rationalism. We love being the realists, right? But to approach some of these conversations without understanding these subjective experiences of these people and why their subjective experience is shaping their understanding of objective reality, it's like we're missing half of the conversation, right? And so I think that's a really interesting perspective to kind of like move forward with. And I kind of like that you started again, as Dan was saying, like on a small scale, like, hey, how can we kind of, come together on a maybe less of a misinformation and more of an accurate quoting of the, Bob Dylan, Pope, whatever.
Right.
So that's really interesting. Yeah.
Great conversation. Bob, any final thoughts before we let you go?
No. Thank you so much for taking my call. I appreciate it. And like I said, NanaCon in late July.
All righty. Bob, thanks so much for being on this call with us and giving us a great topic for conversation. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend.